The cargo freighter Steadfast Horizon drifted through the wreckage of Outpost 7 like a ghost ship navigating a graveyard. Twisted metal and shattered hull plates tumbled slowly through the void, catching starlight and throwing it back in strange, haunting patterns. Captain Rebecca Stone stood on the bridge, her hands gripped tight on the console as she watched the debris field stretch out before them. Every piece of floating wreckage told a story of violence, of a battle that had ended weeks ago but left its scars carved deep into space itself. The war had moved on, but places like this remained, silent testaments to what happened when civilizations clashed. Rebecca's crew had arrived looking for salvage, anything valuable enough to sell at the next port. Times were tough, and a small independent freighter like theirs couldn't afford to be picky about where they found their next payday. But looking at the devastation outside, Rebecca felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Someone had lived here once. Worked here. Maybe even called this place home. "Captain, I'm picking up something weird in Bay 12. Jack Martinez's voice crackled through her earpiece, pulling her from her thoughts. The ship's engineer sounded confused, uncertain. "Sounds like crying?" Rebecca's frown deepened as she tapped her console, bringing up the schematic of the abandoned station. Bay 12 was in the residential sector, a place that should have been evacuated weeks ago when the fighting started. "Crying? Jack, there shouldn't be anything alive out there. Everyone evacuated before the attack." "I know what I'm hearing, Cap." Jack's voice carried that stubborn edge she'd come to recognize over the past 3 years of working together. "It's faint, but it's definitely there. Like something in pain." Rebecca felt her stomach twist. She'd seen enough abandoned stations to know what usually made sounds in the dark: malfunctioning equipment, air cycling through damaged vents, the groan of stressed metal. But crying? That was different. That was something that made her think of things she'd rather not remember. "Fine," she said after a moment's hesitation. "But take Emily with you. I don't want anyone going in alone." Jack met Dr. Emily Brooks at the airlock, both of them suited up and carrying scanning equipment. Emily was the closest thing the Steadfast Horizon had to a proper medical officer, though her training had been cut short when funding ran out at the academy. She was good at what she did, but Jack could see the tension in her shoulders as they crossed into the abandoned station. Their boots echoed in the hollow corridors, each step ringing out like a bell in a tomb. The power was dead, and their helmet lights cut narrow beams through the darkness, illuminating walls scarred with blast marks and corridors choked with debris. Jack's scanner beeped steadily as they moved deeper, following the signal he'd picked up. And then they heard it, a sound that made both of them freeze in their tracks. Whimpering. Soft and pitiful, like a child crying in the dark. "Over there," Emily whispered, her voice tight with emotion. She pointed toward a sealed cargo container shoved into a corner, half hidden behind a collapsed support beam. The kind of container meant for transporting goods, not living things. But the sound was definitely coming from inside. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he worked the manual override, his engineer's training taking over even as his heart pounded against his ribs. What kind of monster would seal something living in a cargo container? The mechanism fought him for a moment, corroded from disuse, and then suddenly gave way with a hiss of escaping air. The container door swung open, and both humans froze, their lights illuminating what lay inside. Curled into a trembling ball in the far corner was a creature unlike anything Jack had ever seen. It was small, roughly the size of the beagle his grandmother used to keep, but that's where any resemblance to Earth animals ended. 6 legs were tucked beneath a body covered in fur that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light, glowing with a faint blue luminescence that pulsed weakly, like a candle about to go out. The creature's head was delicate, almost fragile-looking, with large eyes that stared up at them, eyes that held an intelligence Jack recognized immediately. This wasn't just an animal. This was someone. "Oh my God," Emily breathed, her voice cracking. She dropped to her knees slowly, extending one gloved hand toward the creature. "Hey there, little one. It's okay. We're not going to hurt you. I promise." The creature whimpered again, a sound so full of fear and pain that it made Jack's chest ache. It pressed itself further into the corner, trying to make itself smaller, trying to disappear. Its glow flickered and dimmed, and Jack could see now how thin it was, how its ribs showed beneath the shimmering fur. How long had it been trapped here? Days. Weeks. Jack pulled out his datapad with shaking hands, scanning the creature quickly. The ship's database took a moment to process, then flashed up results that made his blood run cold. "It's a Veltheran bond companion," he said quietly, reading the information scrolling across his screen. "According to this, they're supposed to be sacred to the Veltheran people. Highly intelligent, empathic, bonded to their caretakers for life." He looked up at Emily, confusion and anger mixing in his voice. Why would anyone leave something sacred locked in a cargo container to die? Emily's jaw tightened, her hands still extended toward the trembling creature. Same reason people abandon anything when things get hard, she said, and there was a bitterness in her voice that spoke of old wounds. They decided it wasn't worth the trouble of saving. They decided it was easier to walk away. She looked back at the creature, and her expression softened. Well, they were wrong. Dead wrong. Getting the creature back to the ship took patience and gentle coaxing. Emily eventually managed to wrap it in her jacket, and though it trembled the entire way, it didn't fight them. It was too weak, too exhausted, too broken by whatever it had endured. By the time they reached the Steadfast Horizon's cargo bay, the creature had stopped shaking but still refused to look at anyone directly, its eyes fixed on some distant point only it could see. Rebecca was waiting for them, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The moment she saw what they carried, something shifted in her face. We can't keep it, she said, but even Jack could hear that her heart wasn't in the words. We can't leave it, Emily shot back immediately, her voice fierce with conviction. Look at it, Rebecca. Really look. It's starving. It's injured. And it's absolutely terrified. What kind of people would we be if we just turned our backs and walked away from something that needs help? Rebecca stared at the creature for what felt like a long time. Its fur pulsed weakly with that strange blue light, dimming and brightening like a star at the end of its life. And suddenly she was thinking about Earth, about the golden retriever she'd had as a kid, about coming home from school to find her dad had taken Buddy to the pound because feeding him was too expensive. She remembered the promise she'd made to herself that day, crying in her empty room. She would never be that person. She would never be someone who looked at suffering and chose to walk away. Fine, she said at last, her voice rough. But it's your responsibility, Emily. You're the one who wanted to save it, so you're the one who takes care of it. And if it causes any problems. It won't, Emily interrupted, her voice firm and absolutely certain. I promise you, Rebecca. It won't. As they carried the creature toward the medical bay, setting up a quiet corner with soft blankets and warm lights, none of them noticed the way its large eyes followed Jack Martinez as he moved around the room. None of them saw how its glow brightened just a fraction when he smiled at it, or how it shifted slightly, trying to keep him in its line of sight. They would learn later, much later, that this moment, this simple choice to show compassion when it would have been easier to walk away, was the beginning of something none of them could have predicted. A bond that would grow into something powerful. Something that would challenge ancient traditions and make the galaxy question everything it thought it knew about honor, about value, and about what it truly meant to be civilized. But for now, in the quiet of the medical bay, all they knew was that they had saved one small life from the darkness. And sometimes that's all that matters. 3 weeks had crawled by since they'd pulled Spark from that cargo container, and the little creature was finally starting to look like something other than a walking skeleton. Emily had transformed a corner of the medical bay into a cozy nest, complete with soft bedding she'd requisitioned from the crew quarters and warm lights positioned just right to mimic natural sunlight. She'd studied everything the ship's database had on Velthrans, trying to create an environment where Spark might feel safe enough to heal. But there was still one problem that had Emily worried sick. Spark refused to eat alone. Every single time she left food for him and walked away, she'd come back hours later to find it untouched. The little creature would just sit there in his corner, staring at the food like it might bite him back, his glow dim and getting dimmer by the day. Jack Martinez had noticed the problem too, and he'd started doing something that nobody had asked him to do. Every spare moment he had, and on a small freighter spare moments were rare, he'd spend sitting on the floor of the medical bay just talking. Sometimes he'd read maintenance logs aloud, his voice filling the quiet room with technical jargon about fuel efficiency and engine calibration. Other times he'd just ramble about whatever came to mind, providing a steady stream of words that seemed to be the only thing that kept Spark from retreating completely into himself. Spark would watch Jack during these one-sided conversations, those impossibly large eyes tracking every movement, every gesture. His 6 legs stayed tucked beneath him, making him look even smaller than he already was, and his glow remained dim but steady, like a nightlight someone had forgotten to turn off. You know, Jack said one evening, settling into his usual spot on the floor with a tired grunt, I had a dog once when I was a kid. Border collie named Rocket. Smartest dog you ever met, but he had this one weakness: thunderstorms absolutely terrified him. Jack smiled at the memory, though there was sadness in his eyes. During storms he'd scramble under my bed and just shake. Wouldn't come out for anything. So I'd grab my pillow and lay on the floor next to him, just talking about whatever until the storm passed and he calmed down. He held out a handful of the protein cubes Emily had synthesized, trying to match Velthrin nutritional needs as closely as possible. You remind me of him, you know. Not the way you look, obviously. But that fear in your eyes. That feeling like the whole world might hurt you if you let your guard down for even a second. Spark's ears, delicate, almost translucent things that seemed too fragile to be real, twitched forward slightly. It was the most reaction Jack had gotten in days, and his heart leaped with hope. Whoever left you behind in that station was an absolute idiot, Jack continued, his voice getting stronger, more certain. You're clearly special, Spark. I mean, look at you. You understand every single word I'm saying, don't you? You're not just some pet or animal. You're someone. And someone decided you weren't worth the trouble of saving. He shook his head, anger creeping into his tone. Well, they were wrong. Dead wrong. For the first time since they'd rescued him, Spark moved with purpose. Slowly, carefully, like he was testing whether the floor might suddenly disappear beneath him, he stretched one paw forward. The movement was hesitant, uncertain, but determined. His paw touched the protein cube resting in Jack's open palm, and for a long moment nothing happened. Spark just sat there, his paw on Jack's hand, his eyes locked on the engineer's face. Then, still maintaining that intense eye contact, Spark took the cube and ate it. Jack's breath caught in his throat, his eyes going wide. Emily, he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. Emily, get in here. The doctor practically ran into the medical bay, her scanner already in hand, expecting an emergency. Instead, she froze in the doorway, her mouth falling open at what she saw. Spark was eating. Actually eating, taking cube after cube from Jack's hand like he'd been starving his entire life. Which honestly he might have been. But that wasn't even the most amazing part. With each bite, Spark's bioluminescence was growing brighter. It started as a faint pulse, barely noticeable, but quickly built into waves of blue and gold light that rippled across his fur like aurora borealis dancing across a night sky. The light filled the medical bay, casting strange and beautiful shadows on the walls, making the whole room feel magical and otherworldly. Oh my God, Emily whispered, her fingers flying across her datapad as she pulled up every scrap of information they had. Jack, he's bonding with you. According to the database, Velthrins are deeply empathic creatures. They don't just attach to someone like Earth animals do. They choose one person to bond with, and that bond is... She trailed off, reading faster. It's permanent. Deeper than anything we have on Earth. It's almost like a marriage but more intense. They share emotions, can sense each other's feelings even across distances. Jack looked down at Spark, who had finished eating and was now pressing his warm body against Jack's leg. A sound filled the room, a deep, resonant purr that Jack could feel vibrating through his bones, through his chest, all the way into his heart. Is that okay? Jack asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. I mean, I don't want to trap him into something he doesn't want. He's been through enough already. He chose you, Emily said softly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. After everything he's been through, after being abandoned and left to die, he still had the courage to trust again. He looked at you and decided you were worth that risk. That's not nothing, Jack. That's incredible. From that evening forward, Spark became Jack's shadow. The little creature followed the engineer everywhere, his 6 legs carrying him through the corridors of the steadfast horizon with growing confidence. His glow would brighten whenever Jack laughed, dimming to a soft comfort light when Jack was tired or stressed. The crew adapted quickly, with even grumpy old Mike from navigation using his off hours to build small ramps and perches so Spark could navigate the ship more easily. Rebecca found herself smiling at unexpected moments, like when she checked the security feed and see Jack asleep at his workstation in engineering, with Spark curled up on his chest, both of them snoring softly. It was cute, sure, but more than that, it was proof that they'd done the right thing. That sometimes the best decisions were the ones made with the heart instead of the head. But their peaceful routine shattered like glass 3 weeks after Spark had taken his first bite. The ship's AI, in its calm and emotionless voice, made an announcement that turned Rebecca's blood to ice. Alert! Velthrin Coalition vessel approaching. They are hailing us. Rebecca's hands gripped the armrests of her captain's chair so hard her knuckles went white. She'd spent the past few weeks researching everything she could find about Velthrins, about their culture and their laws. She knew exactly what the Coalition did with bond companions who'd been lost during the war. They didn't rescue them. They didn't rehabilitate them. They euthanized them, claiming it was more honorable than letting them live dishonored by abandonment. She pulled up the security feed showing engineering. Jack was working on something, tools spread around him, and Spark was right there beside him, batting playfully at a loose bolt. Both of them looked so happy, so content, so completely unaware that their whole world was about to come crashing down. Rebecca made a decision in that moment that would change everything, for her crew, for Spark, and maybe for the entire galaxy. "Open a channel," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. "And someone get Jack and Spark to the bridge. Right now." The Veltheran delegation materialized in the steadfast horizon's docking bay in a shimmer of light that made the air itself seem to ripple and bend. 3 tall, elegant beings stepped through the light like they were walking through a doorway between worlds. Their skin had a crystalline quality that caught the harsh overhead lights and threw it back in rainbow patterns across the metal walls. They wore flowing robes that seemed to move even when there was no wind, and they carried themselves with the kind of authority that came from centuries of believing they were superior to everyone else in the galaxy. The one in front, clearly the leader, stepped forward with measured grace. His eyes, if you could call them that, were like polished gemstones, beautiful but cold. "I am Commander Theron of the Veltheran Coalition," he said, his voice melodic and smooth like music, but with an undertone that made it clear this wasn't a social call. "We are here to reclaim lost property. Our long-range scanners detected a Veltheran bond companion aboard your vessel." Rebecca Stone stood at the front of her small crew, her feet planted shoulder-width apart, her arms crossed over her chest. She'd faced down pirates, corrupt station officials, and more than one angry creditor in her years as a freighter captain. She wasn't about to be intimidated by fancy robes and glowing skin. "We don't have any property on this ship," she said, her voice level and firm. "We have crew members. That's it." Theron's crystalline features shifted into an expression that might have been confusion on a human face. "You refer to a bond companion as crew? As an equal?" He tilted his head, studying Rebecca like she was some strange specimen he'd never encountered before. "This is highly irregular. Bond companions are companions, yes, but they are not equals. They are property, valuable property perhaps, but property nonetheless. You must surrender it immediately for proper disposal." "Disposal?" Jack Martinez's voice cut through the docking bay like a knife, sharp and furious. He stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the entrance, and Spark trotted right beside him, wearing the small harness Jack had spent hours fashioning from spare materials. The harness was clearly handmade, stitched with care, with Jack's name embroidered on the side in clumsy letters. "You mean murder. Let's call it what it is. You want to murder him." Spark's glow, which had been a soft blue, suddenly flared bright and fierce. The little creature positioned himself between Jack and the Veltherans, his 6 legs braced, his small body trembling but standing firm. He was maybe a tenth the size of the towering aliens, but he didn't back down. His eyes were locked on Theron, and there was something in them that wasn't fear anymore. It was defiance. Theron stared at Spark, and for the first time, something like genuine surprise crossed his face. "This is unprecedented," he murmured, almost to himself. "The companion displays clear bonding behavior toward a human? This should not be possible. Our species are too different, our emotional frequencies incompatible." "His name is Spark," Emily Brooks said, stepping up to stand beside Jack. Her voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "And he's not going anywhere. Not with you, not with anyone. He stays here with us, with his family." Theron pulled out a sleek scanning device and pointed it at Spark. The device hummed and beeped, displaying information that only the Veltherans could read. Theron's expression hardened, his features becoming sharp and cold. "According to our records, this companion belonged to High Commander Velis of the Third Fleet. When Commander Velis fell in battle 3 months ago, the companion should have been destroyed immediately to prevent dishonor to Velis's memory. Instead, it appears the companion was abandoned at Outpost 7. His voice took on a formal, almost ritualistic quality. "This error must be corrected. The companion must be terminated." "Over my dead body," Jack said quietly, but there was something in his voice that made everyone in the bay go silent. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't bravado. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with absolute certainty. The docking bay fell completely silent except for the hum of the ship's life support systems. The Veltherans exchanged glances, their crystalline faces reflecting confusion and something that might have been disbelief. They were clearly baffled by what they were seeing, humans willing to fight, maybe even die, for a creature that wasn't even their own species. "Let me understand this correctly," Theron said slowly, as if speaking to children who didn't quite grasp basic concepts. "You would sacrifice your life for a lesser being? For something that cannot contribute to your ship, cannot perform duties, cannot even speak your language properly, I would die for my friend, Jack corrected, his hand resting gently on Spark's head. And he's not lesser. He's not property. He's not a thing to be disposed of when he becomes inconvenient. He's just different from us, and that's okay. Actually, that's more than okay. That's what makes him special. And then Spark made a sound that none of them had heard before. It wasn't quite a bark, not quite a cry, not like anything from Earth at all. His bioluminescence pulsed in complex patterns, waves of color that seemed to carry meaning, that seemed to be language itself made visible. The patterns were intricate, deliberate, beautiful in their complexity. Theron actually stepped back, his hand rising to his chest in what might have been shock or reverence. He speaks, the commander whispered, his melodic voice breaking slightly. He speaks in the old way, the pure way we have forgotten. His eyes were fixed on Spark, watching the patterns of light dance across the small creature's fur. He says he chooses the human. He says. Theron's voice caught, and for the first time, he sounded less like a cold military commander and more like someone confronting an uncomfortable truth. He says the humans taught him that abandonment is not the end of the story. That there is always someone who will see you as worth saving, even when your own kind has given up on you. The other two Veltherans shifted uncomfortably, their crystalline skin seeming to dim slightly. One of them looked away as if ashamed. Rebecca saw her opening and pressed forward, her captain's instincts taking over. You can try to take him, Commander Theron. You can absolutely try. But you'll have to go through every single human on this ship first, and we will fight you. She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. And after that fight, whether you win or lose, we'll make sure every news outlet, every government, every sentient being in this galaxy knows exactly what happened here. We'll tell them that the mighty Veltheran coalition, who claim to value honor above all else, murders innocent creatures because keeping them alive is inconvenient. We'll tell them you kill the companions who loved your warriors simply because those warriors fell in battle. Let's see how that plays with your allies. Let's see how honorable you look then. The silence stretched out, tense and fragile. Then Commander Theron did something that shocked everyone in the bay. He knelt down, lowering himself until he was at Spark's level, his flowing robes pooling around him on the metal floor. Forgive us, he said softly, his voice carrying genuine emotion for the first time. Forgive what we have become. Forgive how we have lost our way. He stood slowly, with the careful dignity of someone who had just made a decision that would change everything. He looked at Rebecca, and something in his crystalline eyes had softened. I will report the companion as lost in the void, impossible to recover. But Captain Stone, understand this. If you fail to care for him, if you prove yourselves as cruel and careless as we have been, the coalition will know. And we will return. We won't fail, Jack said, his hand scratching gently behind Spark's ears in exactly the spot that made the little creature's purr rumble through the bay. I promise you that. He's family now, and we don't abandon family. As the Veltherans departed in another shimmer of light, Emily put her hand on Rebecca's shoulder. Do you realize what we just did? She asked, her voice shaking slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. Rebecca watched Spark settle into Jack's arms, watched his glow shift back to that soft, content blue gold that meant he felt safe and loved. Yeah, she said, a small smile crossing her face. We reminded them what compassion actually looks like. We showed them that honor isn't about following old rules blindly. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. 6 months had completely transformed the Steadfast Horizon from a simple cargo freighter hauling supplies between stations into something nobody on the crew had ever expected. Word had spread through the galaxy like wildfire, stories traveling faster than light through communication networks, social media platforms, and good old-fashioned gossip at every space station bar. People were talking about the human ship that had stood up to the Veltheran coalition, about the crew that had chosen compassion over convenience, about the little glowing creature that had found a family among the stars. And now Rebecca's communication console never stopped blinking. Requests flooded in daily, sometimes hourly. Ships carrying abandoned creatures, desperate families trying to save companions they couldn't care for anymore, entire organizations looking for someone brave enough to help when their own governments wouldn't. Captain, there's another ship requesting permission to dock, Mike Peterson called out from the navigation station, his voice carrying that particular exhaustion that came from dealing with the same situation for the 100th time. They've got 3 abandoned Krellan hatchlings. Apparently their home planet is under quarantine because of some plague, and the evacuation ships wouldn't let them bring the hatchlings along. Said they were non-essential cargo. Rebecca rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of 6 months of impossible decisions pressing down on her shoulders. Her ship now housed 7 rescued creatures from 4 different species, each with their own dietary needs, environmental requirements and emotional trauma. The steadfast Horizon was barely functioning as a cargo ship anymore. They were running at a loss, burning through their savings just to keep everyone fed and healthy. But every time she thought about turning someone away, she'd see Spark playing with Jack in engineering, see that joy and trust in his eyes, and she couldn't do it. "Let them dock," she said, her voice tired but resolute. Emily prepped the medical bay. Again. But their growing reputation had attracted more than desperate families and abandoned creatures. It had caught the attention of people who didn't appreciate humans questioning the established order. The Galactic Council, that massive bureaucratic organization that supposedly kept peace between hundreds of species, had summoned Captain Rebecca Stone to testify about charges of cultural interference and violation of sovereign species practices. Now she stood in the most intimidating room she'd ever seen in her life. The council chamber was enormous, a vast space that seemed to stretch up forever, with floating platforms suspended in midair holding representatives from dozens of alien species. Each platform glowed with different colors, and the beings on them ranged from vaguely humanoid to completely incomprehensible. Some had tentacles, some had wings, some were just clouds of gas held together by force fields. And every single one of them was staring down at her. Spark stood at her feet, wearing the translator collar Emily had spent weeks designing. The little creature was trembling slightly, his glow dim with anxiety, but he stayed close to Rebecca, drawing courage from her presence the way he'd learned to do from Jack. "Captain Stone," began Counselor Vex, a reptilian being whose scales seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His eyes were like chips of black ice, cold and completely devoid of sympathy. "You stand accused of violating Veltheran cultural practices by interfering with their traditional methods of honoring fallen warriors. These are serious charges. How do you defend these actions?" Rebecca took a deep breath, forcing her voice to stay steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "With respect, Counselor, I defend it by asking a simple question that I think everyone in this chamber needs to consider. Since when is compassion considered a cultural violation? Since when is saving lives an act of aggression?" Murmurs rippled through the vast chamber, platforms swaying slightly as representatives leaned forward or conferred with their aides. Some of the murmurs sounded approving. Others sounded angry. "The Veltherans have established laws that govern their society," Vex began, his voice taking on that bureaucratic tone that meant he was about to hide behind regulations and protocols. "The Veltherans have traditions," Rebecca interrupted, her voice growing stronger as her fear transformed into righteous anger. "But let's be absolutely clear about something. Traditions that require the death of innocent, intelligent beings aren't sacred. They're not honorable. They're just cruelty dressed up in fancy language and old paperwork." The murmurs grew louder, some platforms now glowing brighter with agitation. A new voice suddenly echoed through the chamber, melodic and unmistakable. "Perhaps, Counselor Vex, we should hear testimony from the companion himself before we judge the humans too harshly." Rebecca's head whipped around to see Commander Theron entering the chamber through one of the high archways. But he wasn't alone this time. Behind him walked dozens of Veltherans, their crystalline skin catching the light and throwing rainbows across the floor. And each one of them held a bond companion, creatures of different colors and sizes, all glowing with the healthy luminescence that came from being loved and cared for. Spark stepped forward, his small body straightening with determination. The translator collar around his neck hummed to life, and when he spoke, his voice filled the entire chamber, small and clear, like a child speaking a truth that adults had forgotten. "I was in the dark," Spark said, and you could hear the tremor of remembered fear in his voice. "Cold. Alone. Hungry. I waited for my bonded to return, calling out into the emptiness, hoping that maybe they had just gotten lost. But they never came back. I thought." His glow flickered dim for a moment. "I thought I had done something wrong. That I had failed somehow, and that's why I'd been left behind." The chamber had fallen absolutely silent. Even the usual background hum of translation devices and floating platforms seemed to have stopped. "Then the humans found me," Spark continued, his glow brightening. "They didn't know me. They didn't owe me anything. I couldn't do anything for them, couldn't work, couldn't fight, couldn't pay them. I was just a broken, scared creature locked in a box waiting to die. But they saw me anyway. They looked past all the reasons they could have walked away, and they decided I was worth saving." Spark's light pulsed in waves now, patterns of blue and gold that seemed to fill the chamber with warmth. "My bonded, Jack Martinez, he told me something once. He said that on Earth, where humans come from, there's a saying, we are judged by how we treat those who can do nothing for us. The humans taught me that I was never worthless. I was never disposable. I was just waiting for the right people to see my worth. Emily, watching from the gallery, wiped tears from her eyes. Even Mike, who prided himself on being tough and practical, felt his throat tighten with emotion. Commander Theron stepped forward then, his voice carrying across the chamber. The Council should be aware of something important. In the 6 months since Captain Stone rescued Spark, over 300 Velthrons have come forward to reclaim companions we abandoned during the war. Companions we were told should die to preserve our honor. We were taught that our traditions, our honor, mattered more than their lives. The humans showed us how wrong we were. They reminded us of values we had forgotten. Counselor Vex shifted uncomfortably on his platform, his scales rippling with uncertainty. This is highly irregular. This is evolution, Rebecca said firmly, her voice ringing with conviction. Every species in this chamber has made mistakes. Every civilization has traditions that maybe made sense once but don't anymore. The question isn't whether we've been wrong, the question is whether we're brave enough to admit it and fix it. Or do we hide behind words like tradition and cultural practice, while innocent beings suffer and die? The council called for recess, the chamber erupting in dozens of conversations at once. But Rebecca could see it in the faces, or face equivalents, around her. She could see the shame in some, the thoughtfulness in others, and in many cases, something that looked a lot like hope. Jack pushed through the crowd and knelt down, wrapping his arms around Spark. "You did so good, buddy. I'm so proud of you." Spark's purr echoed through the massive chamber, a sound of pure contentment that somehow felt louder than all the political arguments combined. 1 year had passed since that first moment when Jack found a small, glowing alien trapped in a metal container. Now the steadfast horizon was coming back home. The ship's outer walls showed a new symbol that everyone across the galaxy now recognized. It was a picture of a 6-legged creature surrounded by bright stars, and underneath it said, "No one left behind," written in 40 different languages. This wasn't just words on a ship anymore. These words meant something real to millions of beings living on different worlds. Mike, the navigator, looked out at the planet below. Earth was getting closer and closer. He spoke into the communication system with a calm voice. "We are entering Earth's orbital space, Captain. The station is ready to receive us." Rebecca, the captain, couldn't help but smile. Today was going to be one of the most important days in galactic history. Today, representatives from many different worlds would sign something called the Universal Companion Rights Treaty. This was a legal agreement that would protect all living creatures who could think and feel, no matter where they lived or what they looked like. It would make sure that no being would ever be treated as trash or property again. And the beautiful part about this whole story was that it had all started with something simple. It started when an engineer with a good heart refused to abandon a small alien. It started when a tiny creature refused to stop believing in the power of friendship and trust. The ceremony took place in a huge hall. The ceiling was so high you could barely see it. The walls were made of special glass that let you see the stars beyond. 60 different species had sent their leaders and representatives. Some were tall. Some were small. Some looked like nothing Earth had ever seen before. But they all came for the same reason. They all wanted to be part of something important. Jack walked onto the stage and right beside him was Spark. The small alien now wore a special vest with symbols on it. This vest meant that Spark was an official interspecies ambassador. This meant that Spark represented all the creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. The Earth ambassador stood up and spoke to everyone in the hall. His voice was serious but kind. "It is a great honor for me to present the Companion Rights Treaty today. This document will protect the rights of all sentient beings across all our worlds. But before we sign it, I want to tell you about someone very special. Spark, would you please say something to everyone?" Spark stepped forward. A soft light came from within him, like he was glowing from the inside out. His translator device activated, and his voice filled the entire hall. The words he spoke were simple but they were powerful. "1 year ago," Spark began, "I had nothing. I thought my life was over. I was alone and scared. But then I met humans who believed in something different. They taught the whole galaxy something simple but true. Every single life has value. Not because of what you can do. Not because of what you can give to others. Life has value just because it exists. It has value because it can feel things. It has value because it can dream." The room became completely quiet. You could hear the soft hum of the station around them. "Thousands of companions and creatures have been saved this year," Spark continued. "They were saved because humans refused to ignore what was wrong. They didn't do it to become famous. They didn't do it to become rich. They did it because they knew it was the right thing to do. Spark looked directly at Jack and something passed between them that everyone could see. It was trust. It was love. It was the bond between two beings from different worlds. Jack told me something about Earth, Spark said. He told me that a long time ago wolves lived on his planet. They were wild and dangerous. But humans did something amazing. They saw past the danger. They saw the possibility of friendship. They had faith that something beautiful could grow if you gave trust a chance. They took wolves and, over many generations, helped them become companions. They became friends. Spark's glow became brighter as he spoke. Today all of us in this room are like those wolves. We are being given a chance to become friends with each other. The humans showed us the way. They showed us that friendship is stronger than fear. Now it is our responsibility to teach others. It is our turn to help the rest of the galaxy understand what humans already knew. One by one, leaders from different worlds came forward to sign the treaty. Each signature appeared on a holographic screen for everyone to see. With each new name, the agreement became stronger and more real. Later, when the ceremony was over and the hall had cleared, Rebecca and Emily stood together, watching Jack and Spark accept congratulations from representatives of different species. Emily turned to Rebecca and asked, "Do you still think about that day? The day when we found him?" Rebecca watched the joy on both Jack's and Spark's faces. She thought about how everything had changed. She thought about the suffering they had prevented. She nodded slowly. "Every single day," Rebecca answered. "We went out looking for old salvage we could sell. We went out thinking we were just doing a job. But we found something much more valuable than money or metal. We found proof that friendship really does matter. We found proof that one act of kindness can change everything. That was the day the galaxy learned what humans had always known in their hearts. That no one should ever be left behind." The end.